Привет, привет, and greetings from Zaporizhzhia on the banks of the river Dnipro here in Ukraine. And in today's video, I'm going to give my reaction to a big kerfuffle on YouTube recently here in Ukraine with Johnny FD's interview on RT America, Russia Today America, where he gave his 2 cents on the current tensions between Russia and Ukraine. And many of you commented under my recent video about whether I'll have to flee Ukraine in the face of advancing Russian troops. You asked me for my reaction and what I thought of what's happened. A lot of you left a lot of comments about what you think about this scandal, shall we say, Johnny Gate. And in the video, I want to just kind of segue from that video by explaining and pointing out exactly how the media, the mainstream media, can manipulate you, especially if you're not an expert on something, and answer the question that seems to be on a lot of people's minds. Is Johnny FD a secret Russian agent, Agent Johnny, or is he just another hapless American traveling through Europe, in this case Eastern Europe? So, Поехали, let's get into the video. All right, let's get out of the cold here on a February's day in Zaporizhzhia and have a look exactly what Johnny said in his interview on RT America.
So while embassies are being evacuated, the State Department also insisting Americans residing in Ukraine do the same. But not our next guest.
So I'm just going to skip ahead to the first answer that Johnny gives that caused a lot of controversy. I'm going to link the whole interview down below, both from his channel and also the one that RT posted, which is important. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But just listen how this question is phrased by the interviewer.
Since you're on the ground there, I mean, is it true? Is this a myth? Do Ukrainians really hate Russians, or is this all blown out of proportion by the media?
So there, the interviewer asked a rather strange question in the context of the political situation or the tension here in Ukraine. She asked Johnny a leading question, which is, well, basically, is it true, as the media seems to be claiming, the Western media, I guess it's implicated, that Ukrainians hate Russians? That's not the source of the tension or what the media attention has been about over the last 2 months. It's about basically whether Russia building up its forces on 3 sides of Ukraine indicates whether they're going to launch a new invasion of the country or not. That's the real core question that's been in the media, and that's why we have so much media attention, the background to the conflict, as I went into in the first video that I made maybe about a month ago about the origins of this tension. Is about Ukraine trying to move away from Russia's sphere of influence towards Western institutions like the European Union and NATO, and Russia's attempts to persuade them not to do that. Really, there isn't much about debate, at least in any media I've seen, whether Ukrainians hate Russians. And that leads me to believe that there's a bit of an agenda in that question. That's a leading question, because is Johnny gonna, let's see how Johnny answers it.
So, a lot of Ukrainians hate, the policy or, the Russian government or what happened in Crimea in 2014. But Ukrainians don't hate Russians. Most of them have family members in Russia.
So the first part there where he says that many Ukrainians dislike or hate is actually the word he used, because he took the word from the interviewer's question, that basically Ukrainians hate the policies of the Russian government. I mean, that's a fair point to make. Definitely annexing Crimea, and he could have mentioned also the war in the east of Ukraine just led to 14,000 lives being lost. Definitely there are many Ukrainians who disagree with that. But let's see how he continues.
Ukrainians don't hate Russians. Most of them have family members in Russia. They have really good relations with them as cousins or family members. It's probably very similar to how Americans and Canadians are. So that's completely blown out of proportion. I'm sure there's some extremists, but 99.9% of Ukrainians like Russian people. They love Russian people.
Okay, this is the answer that caused most of the controversy, right? So there are 2 parts to that. He said that 99.9% of Ukrainians love Russian people. And then he made a comparison between say Americans and Canadians, and Ukrainians and Russians. He also said there were a few extremists, but that was a bit confusing. I didn't really understand what he meant there, in the sense that normally it's Russian media, pro-Russian media, that paints the picture that, you know, there are lots of Ukrainian neo-Nazis and stuff like that. So, and especially in RT, there's often, RT Americans, often that description. So, yeah, it's a little bit confusing to me. But anyways, let's deal with what he really meant there was a bit confusing to me. But let's deal with the first statement, that 99.9% of Ukrainians love Russian people. I doubt 99.9% of Russian people love Russian people, never mind Ukrainians. And you know, that's an unfortunate thing to have said. I don't know where he's getting 99.9%. He says that they have families you know, they have family members of both sides. Many people do, but you have to remember, Ukraine is a big country. It's got a population of, I guess, around 40 million, plus or minus. And geographically, it's the biggest country in Europe, and there's definitely going to be a divergence of opinion if you're in, say, Western Ukraine, which just historically has not been as close to Russia as, say, parts of the East are, especially, you know, with during Soviet times, when, you know, there were a lot of factories built in this city where I am now, in Zaporizhia, and they brought people from all over the Soviet Union to work here in the factories. And, you know, in general, those people and their descendants live here now. But that's very different to, say, being in Western Ukraine, where, in general, people don't have family members on the other side of the border, from what I can see and people I talk to. And a lot of people do hold quite negative opinions of Russian people, which is connected, obviously, to the government's policies, especially in the last few years. So this idea that 99.9% of Ukrainians love Russian people seems a bit far-fetched, and plays into the question he was asked, well, do they hate Russian people? And by, unfortunately, answering with 99.9%, and he's basically saying, wow, almost kind of the same thing when you juxtapose that with the fact that many people have family members, obviously, in Russia, and especially in these cities that were industrialized during the Soviet Union. That's in particular more true. So that feeds into a bigger narrative that the Russian government has, and in particular, President Putin has expounded on in an essay he wrote that's on his website, the presidential website, where he described Ukrainians and Russians as basically one people. And that's an important narrative for Russia, with their attempts to persuade Ukraine not to leave their sphere of influence, is that, well, basically, you kind of don't exist as a country. We're all really one people, a triune nation, what they call along with Belarusians. So that feeds into a narrative. Now, if he had been aware of that, then he could have avoided making a statement that fed into that leading question so much. Then the second part, where he talks about, well, it's kind of like Canadians and Americans, Russians and Ukrainians. Do 99.9% of Canadians love Americans? I don't know. His analogy that Americans and Canadians, it's like Ukrainians and Russians. Well, politically, it's actually the real source of the conflict is the fact that Ukrainians don't want to be like Canadians. Think about it, right? So US and Canada, they have a shared, I guess, history, we can say. America invaded them in 1812. The Brits kicked them out again, basically. There's a common language. In Canada, it's the language spoken by most of the people. So obviously the other official language is French. In Ukraine, the official language is Ukrainian, but a lot of people do speak, obviously, Russian here as well. US and Canada are in a trade bloc together. It's called NAFTA. And they're in a military alliance, which is called NATO, right? Russia has a trade bloc, which is called the Eurasian Economic Union, and it has a military alliance called CSTO. There's another military alliance also with China, but we'll stick to CSTO. And Ukraine does not want to be part of those two. In fact, it wants to be part of the alternative, which is to join the European Union, which is obviously more than a trade bloc, but essentially, if you compare the two of them, NAFTA and European Union is kind of close that you'll get, and they want to be part of NATO. Right? That's what the current government wants. The current government was democratically elected. The current president won 75% of the vote in the last election. So that's the current situation. And in opinion polls now, Ukraine joining NATO has a majority support in the country. I know that a lot of people don't vote or can't vote who are living in the Russian-controlled areas of Donbass and also in Crimea, but that's the result of Russia's geopolitical strategy that those people don't vote anymore in the Ukrainian. So now it's in the Ukrainian election. So those people will say the majority of Ukrainians favor joining both the European Union and joining NATO, which is the alternative to the Eurasian Economic Union led by Russia and the CSTO. So that is kind of the source of the conflict. It's the fact that they're not like Americans and Canadians at all. Otherwise, there'd be no conflict. If Ukraine wanted to join the CSTO and wanted to join the Eurasian Economic Union, we wouldn't have this current tension between Russia and Ukraine whatsoever. So there, he's maybe in good faith trying to make an analogy that Ukrainians, that's more a political issue and not one between the two peoples. But even there, I think, if you go and you talk to people, obviously war veterans who've been fighting on the front line and ask for their opinion, or people in Western Ukraine, or just get a more deeper and more broader set of views in the country, you're not going to get 99.9% of Ukrainians saying they love Russian people. I doubt you get 90%. I did look up some opinion polls. There's nothing about liking the people per se, but just, do they see how they perceive Russia? And unfortunately, at the moment, the majority of Ukrainians perceive Russia as hostile. So, anyways, that's unfortunate, and it feeds into that leading question, that narrative that the interviewer was looking for. There are also 1.5 million internally displaced people in Ukraine. I'm not sure how much they love Russians. Maybe they do still, but I'm a little bit dubious on that count. Let's see how the interviewer responds to Johnny's answers.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear, because, as it is here, it's like you see the mainstream media and it's all showing, these Ukrainians training for war alongside the military. So, we'd like to hear it from somebody that's actually on the ground, that's a third party that's neither Russian nor Ukrainian. So what exactly drew you to Ukraine in the first place? Why vlog there?
So there you see, she refers to images of Ukrainians training as basically reservists, either formally or informally, to protect the country in the event of renewed or expanded Russian invasion. And she takes Johnny's answer about what he thinks is most Ukrainians, overwhelming majority of Ukrainians loving Russian peoples, to say, that's all not true, showing those images, which is completely disconnected from what Johnny was answering and what the real crux of the issue is. So yeah, there you can see definitely a lot of manipulation and a very leading question. Basically, she was looking for an answer, like Ukrainians don't hate Russians, to then try to claim that images of many Ukrainians that are shown in Western media training as reservists is not true. They're not doing that. Again, I don't really see the logical connection, but apparently this is what it seems to me like that the whole objective of inviting Johnny on to RT America was, because they led with the title on their channel, on the RT America channel, as Ukrainians don't hate Russians, says American businessman and YouTuber. Now, Johnny said a lot of things in the interview. It's interesting they didn't pick his start of his answer, which is Ukrainians hate the Russian government's policies. No, they led with this, which is why they had the question. It seems to me that's why they phrased the question that way. It's not really connected, very strongly with actually the source of the conflict is and the source of the tension, what's been in the media in general. Now, let me fast forward to a clip that was not maybe as controversial online, but kind of illustrates the issue with going on to a big mainstream media channel like RT America, Russia Today America, and in the format of being kind of categorized as an expert, when your opinion will be more suited to say a vox pop, man on the street kind of interview, and how again this can mean that you get manipulated.
Now, I know you don't generally wade into geopolitics, especially on your page, but from your personal experience on the ground, what do you think is behind this stalemate at the border?
So there they ask him, the interviewer asked him a very specific geopolitical question. What is the source of the stalemate at the border? So she's referring to the fact that Ukraine is kind of surrounded on three sides by significant Russian forces. And you've obviously got the background with President Putin claiming several times that they're one nation, and that, in practice that Ukraine's not really a country. And obviously they've already annexed Crimea from Ukraine, and there's a war in the east of the country. So these are things that obviously concern the Ukrainian government, but this is a very complex geopolitical question. What's causing this stalemate, which is like this confrontation, this Russian buildup on the border. And that, if you're in this kind of studio format where you're not the person on the street, like doing a vox pop, that's very, you have to be very wary of answering that, especially when you've been invited onto RT America. Like for me, if I were going to go on such a channel, it doesn't matter if it's RT America or BBC or CNN. Now, he got criticized because he went on RT America. That's within the the context of the conflict and the fact that he lives in Ukraine and owns property here, and he's more or less a guest in Ukraine, and he goes on a channel that's actually banned in Ukraine, run by the Russian government. But just in general, if you're invited on, I would want to know, first of all, I'd research the channel and what its editorial line, the journalist who's going to interview me. I'd ask them, what's the framework of the interview, what kind of questions are going to be asked, so I would have a chance of being prepared for them. And even with my background, like in international relations and having worked on, cases to do with Russia and geopolitics and gas and whatnot in the past as a lawyer, and having lived here for 10 years, speaking Russian and Ukrainian, I mean, this is not so easy to answer. That's why I made a full video about it. I'll link it up above in the card down below in the description to the video, where I deal with the, what's causing this conflict. So anyways, this is a very hard question for someone to answer in this context if they're not, really well informed. Let's see how Johnny gets on.
Yeah, so you're right. I normally, show travel and lifestyle, cost of living and things like that. But so many people sent me, these kind of hysterical, videos, from mainstream news, even Vice News. So I had to look into it. Personally, I think that, Russia wanted to show its force. They wanted to get the West's attention so they could have their demands about Ukraine potentially joining NATO in the future or the EU, and they wanted to show that they're serious.
So there you see Johnny's given his reaction, which is basically that Russia wants to be taken seriously. Now, does that mean they're planning to invade, or it's just brinkmanship, like they just want to intimidate Ukraine? And apparently the US, I don't know what he's trying to say exactly in that answer. It's he's understood at least the context that Russia has demands, which are basically that NATO moves out of all of Eastern Europe, and these are unrealistic demands in the context of the geopolitical situation, and that basically Ukraine doesn't get to join the EU and NATO. At the moment, they're only demanding they don't join NATO, but in reality, it's also to persuade Ukraine not to leave its sphere of influence and to join its alternatives. But yeah, he seems to actually indicate that he thinks it's serious, like that Russia really wants to invade, I guess. All right, that's his 2 cents.
The U.S., I think, they always want someone as the enemy. Afghanistan and the Middle East is no longer the enemy. People are tired of hearing about COVID. So the news just needed something else to highlight. And, Ukraine versus Russia was the easy target.
And then the second part is that the media latched onto this because they needed something to replace it. It's kind of like slow Tuesday news or something. Well, if you really believe that Russia is serious about coercing Ukraine through military force not to leave its sphere of influence, then that's really newsworthy in the first place. So, yeah, I don't know. Johnny didn't... I just find these answers a bit confusing. Anyways, let's see how the interviewer responds.
Yeah, it looks like the perfect staging ground. Well, I'm glad that somebody out there like you, who's just a regular person, not involved in politics, can kind of break it down for us. And I know your page is chock full of travel stories. Is Ukraine going to be home for you henceforth?
So there, the interviewer says, yeah, we have someone who's not an expert who can break it down for us. Well, I think that's part of the problem. You can't break it down very well.
Yeah, so actually I bought this apartment that I'm living in now. I actually bought 2 properties here in Ukraine. I like it as a base. I would love to travel to Europe from here, to Georgia. If I can get a visa to Russia, I would love to go there. It's just a very central place to spend, 6 months of the year while I travel, once a month from my home here.
So I guess what he wanted to say there is that, yeah, Russia is serious about invading, and the media latched onto this because, yeah, it's a great conflict to cover in terms of being sensationalist. Well, it's not even really that it's sensationalist if they're seriously going to invade. But that I agree with. Of course, the news, the media wants us to click on stuff. That's how they make money. So, of course, they're going to lean towards being melodramatic. It's how they get our attention. But again, that if he'd given that as a vox pop answer, like he's just a man on the street, that would be perfectly fine. There's no expectation that you really understand what's going on. The problem is he's done this in the context of sitting kind of a studio format, like as if he is able to break things down in terms of what's the source of the conflict. And that's problematic in general to do. Funnily enough, he also kind of indirectly indicates that he wants a Russian visa later on in the interview, and also there's a strange screenshot sound, like he's trying to screenshot himself because his hand moves. So I think that probably indicates a lot of his motivation, maybe to have gone and given this interview with Russian state TV in English, like, hey, I need a visa to go to Russia, and I want to, put this on my channel, which is what he's done, right? So obviously with a different title to what RT led with. So that kind of indicates that he was perhaps motivated, like a lot of YouTubers are, who are in the more entertainment field, lifestyle, and looking to monetize through AdSense, which is basically getting more clicks on your videos. Then all publicity is kind of good publicity, I guess. So next day, he kind of walked back his interview by posting an apology of sorts on the comments under the first video, and then he released an apology video of sorts, more or less saying the same stuff that's in his comments. So let's just read out the comment that he put under his video. First, I want to apologize for offending anyone. Do genuine apologies start with that line? I didn't realize how much they were hated. I guess he's referring to RT America. I don't watch any news channels, as honestly they are all biased on propaganda. BBC, CNN, and Fox News are all biased as they can be. It's all propaganda. So yeah, he doesn't pretty watch any news at all, which again means how can you, you have to, my last video I said either you watch everything, or you get a broad spectrum of stuff, and then you figure out and you understand the different biases, and in this case propaganda you could call it, because it's Russian state TV, and you understand where they're coming from to be able to make an informed decision, or you just don't watch anything. So it seems that Johnny just went for, I don't watch anything, and it begs the question, why did he go onto RT America to give his 2 cents? That being said, if you hate Fox News for being too right-wing and conservative, then you should go on as a guest and voice your leftist views. If you hate what RT is saying, you should go on and say Ukrainians hate the Russian government's policies on what Russia did to Crimea in 2014. So that's actually how he started his answer, the one that was controversial. So I guess he's kind of saying, that's not actually what he ended up doing, right? He said that part, and then he got, I think, manipulated in by the question into actually repeating a lot of RT's talking points. So I guess he's kind of saying he wished he got on and actually said that, and actually just expounded on that. And then it might have been a pretty valid point, but I think he just got a little bit caught up because he didn't understand really enough about the situation. He doesn't really inform himself. So, unfortunately, either way, at the end of the day, if Russian news wants to push the narrative that Putin doesn't actually want to invade Ukraine and wants the potential war to end, then I'm all for it. Yeah, it seems like he's buying into their messaging, which is like, Russia doesn't want to invade, but they will if they're provoked. I mean, as we all know, anyone who's dealt with a SJW or a social justice warrant, people being provoked is pretty, it's pretty easy. And, you know, just historically, I referred to in the last video, you have the Gleiwitz incident, you know, where Nazi Germany claimed to be provoked by Poland in 1939. They basically went and shot and killed some Germans and blamed the Poles for it. And then next day they were into Poland. And also, you know, the Soviet Union also launched a false flag operation to be provoked by Finland, and they had the Winter War and pretty similar. So again, it seems that he still doesn't really understand, you know, the issues that were created by him going on RT and not understanding the full context and informing himself and understanding the editorial line and what they want out of him, even now afterwards. So, I mean, I'll link down below his apology video, because he didn't really contest the Russian narrative that strong. It's not like he went on and said, people hate Putin, and, you know, he's pushing Ukrainians away, further and further and further away from Russia and Russian people, and it's tragic. But it's, you know, if he had gone on and said that in his interview, that would definitely match with what he's written in his comment. But at the end of the day, that's not really what he did, unfortunately. So the Soviets were reputed to have an expression that I saw in some of the reaction to the Johnny Gate controversy, where they described people who they would use for propaganda purposes who were well-meaning. This is back obviously in the Soviet Union days, where you had a lot of, say, Marxists from, or communists, or people more left-wing from, say, Western Europe or from North America, who then go to the Soviet Union and obviously be led around to the nicest parts and then go back and say, yes, the Soviet Union is great, there's no famine in Ukraine or whatnot. There's a famous controversy from the 1920s and 30s, for example, you know, the reporting of the Holodomor here, the famine. So the Soviets refer to these people as useful idiots because they basically were easy to manipulate into repeating Soviet talking points and their propaganda narrative, and, you know, they just basically exploited these people and saw them as useful idiots, quite rightly. Now, is Johnny a useful idiot, as some people wrote, you know, in comments and on some YouTube videos? I don't know if he's ideologically sympathetic to the Russian government. He seemed to be wishing that he'd gone on and actually contested their narrative, but he didn't seem to have done it. He also has a bit of a vested interest, since he seems to be trying to get a Russian visa. So maybe idiot is not really the right word. Maybe he was just simply doing it for his own benefit in terms of getting, you know, more views on his channel and maybe a Russian visa out of it. Not entirely sure, but, you know, I think a useful idiot would be more what you see with a lot of Marxists even today, for example, who are, you know, pro Russia in this conflict, where, you know, Russia is not a communist state at all, but they're basically just pushing, repeating all the Russian talking points as well, because they seem so ideologically against, say, America and the West, that basically they see my adversary's adversary. So adversary of the US is Russia, so I'm going to support them, and then they repeat all the talking points. You see that actually also on RT America, a lot of Marxists are there. So maybe they're more the useful idiot type than Johnny, who seems maybe a little bit more cynical in going on RT. So in conclusion to the video and my reaction to Johnny's car crash interview on Russia Today America, do I think that Johnny FD is a secret genius agent of the FSB or the GRU, Russian intelligence, or is he just a little bit unlucky, irresponsible, and, you know, has been manipulated by the mainstream media? Well, I'd like to think, if Russia is recruiting agents in this manner, that they would be just a tad bit more informed about what's going on in Ukraine than Johnny appears to be. Or maybe this is a new strategy, a new type of intelligence agent that I'm, you know, naively not catching on to. But no, on the balance of what I've seen in the video, I think, yeah, just Johnny was a bit feckless by going on to RT America when he's an American living in Ukraine who's invested in property here. And yeah, he just didn't really seem to understand the consequences of that and really inform himself properly about what's going on here in Ukraine before he accepted that invitation to appear on RT America. So yeah, sorry to disappoint. I'm not buying that he's Moscow's man in Kiev or something like that. But it is an important point to not just learn about, obviously, mainstream media manipulation. I think you're probably aware of how that works to a certain extent anyways. But if you are moving to Eastern Europe, you really got to know what's going on in the country before you decide to move here to Ukraine or say to Russia or to Moldova or Belarus or somewhere else in Eastern Europe. Because this is what comes up a lot in my programs, you know, whether it's moving here to Ukraine or, you know, my Russia program. Because if you don't understand the consequences and the culture and what's happening politically, you can often make, you know, the wrong decision for you. Now, I think there's different type of guys that are better suited to the different countries here in Eastern Europe. That's something I've learned over the last few years with my consulting in particular. For example, I have a participant in my Russia program who has been in Russia for the last at least few weeks. I think he's there for over a month at this stage. And like, if you're a kind of person who's trying to flee all these COVID restrictions, the last place you want to be moving to in Eastern Europe in the last, say, 6 months is Russia. Like, he has a Western vaccine and he can't go around and live his daily life in St. Petersburg at the moment. And it's been like that. Like, he couldn't go to the theater. He was refused. Why? Because he didn't have a vaccine or a PCR test within the last 72 hours. You know, a vaccine that was approved, because they're only, you know, Western vaccines are not considered legitimate for the purposes of being able to, you know, with these vax certs and whatnot. I mean, that's not an issue here in Ukraine. So, you know, if you're trying to avoid the COVID restrictions and all these vax certs, then don't move to Russia at the moment. It just doesn't seem like the perfect place, definitely not to St. Petersburg. Whilst here in Ukraine, it's going to be less of an issue, clearly, and probably in Belarus and Moldova, it's also, you know, from that point of view, better than being in Russia right now. On the flip side, if dating is your main priority to move, then maybe Russia does make sense. Like, if you're not planning to go to cafes and restaurants or the theater, not sure how you're probably going to go on dates, but yeah, your foreigner factor is going to be way higher in Russia than it's going to be safe here, for example, in Ukraine. I had a guy who's contacted me as a prospective client to live this our experience in person, and he told me he paid a matchmaker here in Ukraine, and they set him up on dates that he said he would have turned down in Canada, in North America. He would have turned them down. So yeah, that just gives you an indication that probably from the dating side, if you're flying in for a few weeks and not moving for long term, then Ukraine maybe isn't the best country for you to consider. It's going to be one or the other. So in general, yeah, you need to have figured out which countries are going to suit you the best and what's really going on in the country, and you need to inform yourself. Obviously, we have all the tensions between Russia and Ukraine at the moment, so, you know, you need to factor that in. If you're going to buy property here, you might get it a bit cheaper at the moment, but, you know, if you think it's going to be invaded in 2 weeks, like Johnny seemed to even indicate he seemed to be pushing that direction, then do you want to buy property here in those circumstances? Probably not. On the flip side, if you don't think it's going to happen, maybe it's a good time to buy. Anyways, I'll put links to all my, you know, programs and my consulting stuff down below if you are interested in that. And I will see you in the next video. Do побачення, до свидання from Zaporizhzhia in Ukraine. Ciao, ciao.
SAR Experience.